Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. I guess my goal is to have as many different broadcast locations as possible over a couple weeks.
I think
So,
this is a fine goal. So, doing a really good job at it. I think you should keep this up.
yeah.
So,
Incidentally, I have a map of Boston behind me. So, I
oh,
was in
funny.
Boston. Now I have a map, but I'm in Utah.
You
So,
didn't buy the map while you were there, though, right?
I did not buy the map. No, it's just already in the room where I'm
Okay,
hanging out today. So, yeah,
got it. It's like, well, that'd be a very touristy thing to do, but hey,
very
we're
much
tourists,
so.
right?
That's right. Yeah, we could just admit it. Yep,
Yeah,
that's how it is.
we do have a business presence in Massachusetts now, though. So I would say
That's
that
right.
if
Yep.
we end up hiring or moving there more, then so be it. So, cool. Well, today I think we're going to talk about something that's been near and dear to us for a while. And I know we've had other Monday morning data chats on this, but this is a slightly different variation, maybe. Hiring data engineers is really hard. So
It is. And I know this morning you were searching for statistics. Did you find some, or was it just kind of a
I
struggle when
found
you got
really
going?
outdated ones, really. I
Okay.
mean, the last thing I found was here's the trouble with everyone knows data engineering hiring is hard. Anyone who's trying to find data engineers,
Yeah.
anecdotally, we hear it's hard. It's hard to find actual numbers on this still. I can point to things like IT unemployment rate, which is super vague and encompasses everybody. I can look at the. I actually tried to download the Dice Q3 jobs report, but for
Yeah.
some reason I kept getting a 403 error when I downloaded it. But so
Seems
thanks,
appropriate.
Dice, fix your stuff,
Yeah,
please.
it also seems
Sucks.
appropriate for the job market, right? Like, yeah.
Right. Like, yeah. So, but yeah, point being, it's definitely a big challenge.
Yeah.
So, what else are you looking at? Just statistics that are kind of tried and true, and I don't know how updated they are, but I know it's probably worse, which is, data engineering is growing by 50% a year. I think that was the Dice
Yeah.
2020 stat, and so forth. So anyway, right. But I would say every single day we're hit up by somebody asking, "Hey, do you know of any data engineers?" We're like,
Yep.
no, we don't
And
at
when you
all.
say anecdotally, let me add, these are really big companies coming to us. So we
And
probably
small
shouldn't
companies.
say who, but like some huge companies have come to us asking, like, do you know any data talent? So that would suggest this is a real phenomenon, but it's still anecdotal.
It's big companies. I would
Yeah.
say, the thing that caught my attention, these are big companies with armies of recruiters too. This isn't like, a two-person company or something. These are
Mhm.
companies that are, I would guess data engineers would be clamoring to work there. And yet we get, messages from people higher ups there asking, "Hey, do you know of any data engineers that are looking for work?" And we're like, no,
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
But then this just trickles down to basically every single company right now because what I think what we're noticing is data engineering is hard to hire across the board. If you're a smaller company, especially, I would say attracting talent is difficult,
Yeah.
to
Agree.
say the least.
And I mean, I think in general, is this also true for software developers and other types of engineers in the tech industry? I've kind of heard that. I don't know how it compares to data engineering, looking for like Java developers or front end developers or
I'm
whatnot.
guessing so.
Yeah.
Again, I would love to see the most updated stats, on this. But I remember looking at the Q2 Dice jobs report, and
Yeah.
it definitely echoes that sentiment where software, we're talking front end or back end, was, I think it was more back end really, but that
Yeah.
was one of the areas that was growing a ton. And just, there were definitely more job postings than there were jobs.
Yeah.
So,
And yet we see all these contradictions like tech companies cutting salary for remote workers, right? They complain they can't find people, and yet they're cutting the salaries of the people who are working for them, which makes them more likely to leave.
right.
Yeah. Like that, nothing antagonizes people like taking away a right that they've enjoyed in the past. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter that they have a lower cost of living because they moved to the middle of Nebraska or Kansas or something like that. They're still going to be upset if you do this.
Yeah. And meanwhile, there's other companies that will pay market rate,
Yep.
regardless of what that is or where that is, I suppose,
Yeah.
for top talent. And so I find it really interesting. But, I think that the central challenge is if you're an employer, um, how do you go about finding data engineers these days? And I think one of the central questions that we want to address is do you build or buy, i.e., do you build the talent internally and try and find people who could become great data engineers, or do you go out on the market and try and buy talent, or both? So
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a tough problem, right? I feel like organizations aren't necessarily set up to do this. They're not necessarily set up to train people. to become great data engineers or data scientists. And so the tendency instead is to go to particular universities or boot camps and this kind of thing. But it's great if you have a degree from Stanford. You're still not fully formed as a data engineer, not even close. It's still going to take like years of training to actually get good at the profession, in my experience.
Interesting. But I mean, what, if we were to look at that though, let's take the thesis that you need to build talent, right? Like buying talent is off the table because
Right.
let's just take an
Doesn't
extreme
exist.
example and say that there is no more data engineering talent in the world to hire.
Right.
What would you do in this case?
So I think ideally companies should start thinking about how to train people. And I think that comes down to basically doing apprenticeships. So you find people who have some background either in technology or background that suggests that they might be good at working with data. And that could be background in statistics. It could be a background in math. It could be a background in computer science that's not data specific. And then I think in my experience, the best way to train people is through basically an apprenticeship process. In other words, yeah, it's good to have formal classroom training. It's good to have formal exams. But at the end of the day, people just need experience doing the job and starting on basic problems and then graduating into harder problems over time.
Yeah, I like that approach. I'm a big fan of apprenticeships too. I think that, as a general rule, I feel like apprenticeships in trades or one of those things. And I put software engineering and data engineering in the classification of trades, to be frank. Like I don't think that I don't think a 4-year degree is that necessary per se for these types of skills. I would say it's, you've seen the success playing out in some boot camps. I will caveat by saying some, not all. There's definitely not all boot camps are created equal, but technology is one of those fields where it's very much a meritocracy still. I think your ability to get skills and continue learning new skills is paramount to your success. So it's not like medicine where, and I think rightfully so, you should go to medical school and put in the time to become a good doctor. I would shudder to think of a surgeon who took a 3-week boot camp and is now qualified to do surgery. That would be super scary. But we're not talking about that, right? So
it's good to compare, though. I mean, I do like the process of comparing training across fields because I think tech does have some things to learn from medicine. So, for example, the internship process. Maybe we need to think more in those terms of just taking people who have some basic training and running them through something like an internship and then a fellowship eventually so they can gain advanced skills, and rotating them through different types of jobs so they get a broader set of skills, which is basically what medicine does.
Yeah, exactly. And Brian Olson, what's up, Brian? How you doing? He has a really good point here. Apprenticeships also help reach a more diverse group of people who don't have the means to go to college. I completely and here's the deal too. We teach at college, right? I will be the first to say that, one, I'm not the best student in the world. I still teach because I feel like it's to me at this point in my career, it's about giving back. But that said, college is expensive. I don't think I need to remind anyone of this like fact or tautology. It's just like college is expensive. No way around it. And if you're going to study something, I would say, just advice for people who want to get a college degree, find something with a good ROI, especially if you're going to take out loans. That's all I'm going to say on this thing.
I mean, I kind of, I have nieces and nephews, and one piece of advice I give them is like, look, go to college, but like maybe go find another tech job part-time while you're in college and see if you like it. Not everyone is going to like technology. Not everyone is going to be good at it. Not everyone is going to have the interest. But if you get into it and you're like, oh, here's a job that I really enjoy and I can do, develop that career in parallel to going to college. And ultimately, that may be the thing that pays the bills. But having the college degree will be kind of a backup. And it also just enriches your life in various ways, I think.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So we can get into those nuances.
You may have a different attitude about it. Obviously, I'm a hyper academic for better or worse.
Well, yeah. I mean, we're talking like the epitome of an academic here. You got your math PhD and all that. I mean, I'm a math major as well, but I wouldn't say it. There was a point where I figured I would go get a PhD, but then it's like, at the end of the day, for me personally, I wasn't sure what I'd gain from the experience. There's still a chance that, when I'm, older and wiser and slightly richer, I might go and get a PhD of some sort. I don't know what. And, I wouldn't put it off the table yet, but let's get back to hiring challenges. Engineers.
It's
Raymond Tan actually has a really good point here. He's studying data engineering because he's finding it hard for his company to invest for a data engineer for his
Yeah.
small group, and it's hard to find one that will be interested to join the small group. So uh, he'll just do it and learn from the job. I think that's a super awesome approach,
Yeah.
Raymond.
think
I
that's
fully agree. Like, this is how it should be done,
yeah.
because that also shows, to us that's cool because it shows initiative. But I think
Yeah.
it's just a matter of necessity. Like, where are you going to find people?
Right, exactly.
So
And that's, another possibility at companies. And frankly, this is kind of how both of us got into it is internal recruiting. In other words, find someone who's doing another job well, that's kind of related, who has an interest, and pull them into data engineering problems. And if they do
yep.
well in those data engineering problems, then they can become a data engineer. So, I
Hmm.
mean, when I was working in tech initially, I found that the data side, actually getting data, was the really hard part of data science.
Yep.
And so I started back then, getting very involved with understanding how Hadoop works. I read the big, Hadoop, the definitive guide,
Oh,
and then
fun. That's a
it
good
was,
read.
it's a good read. I mean, it does help you to understand a lot about distributed systems and such, even though Hadoop is maybe a bit past its prime. But yeah, then it happened to be the era when everyone was moving into the cloud. So I kind of got into that domain of data technologies. But point being, there are opportunities to make data engineers rather than simply internally, rather than having to hire someone and start from scratch, someone you don't know, someone with no track record at your company. But it's
I would
tricky
think
because,
that's
yeah, go ahead.
tricky. Why?
Well, I was going to say it's tricky because then you end up recruiting away from other groups that also have talent shortages at your company. It's a real
It's true.
possibility.
Yeah, you're robbing Peter to
Yeah,
pay Paul, as the old
exactly.
fable
Yeah,
goes, right?
yeah,
So, yeah, Dave Foreman here. What's up, Dave? Good to see you, man. There are sponsored courses run by nonprofit orgs, 3 to 6 month data courses. These are great to partner up with.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree. If you could find something like that, that'd be super. I would say the field of data engineering is nuanced in some weird
yeah.
ways where I'm not seeing as much good material for data courses. I think
Right.
maybe the best one I've seen is actually our buddy Andreas Kretz
Yeah,
out of Germany. He has just some phenomenal data engineering courses and materials. I think that'll level you up. Stay tuned for the stuff we're working on too. We got a book,
yeah,
obviously, on data engineering, which we
yeah,
plug all the time shamelessly, but there's going to be a course on that one too. I would
yeah.
say in this context, though, there's so data engineering is such a wide open field. I,
Right.
I would say, like, just because there's one content creator who has a data engineering course doesn't mean there's not room for more. In fact, I welcome more opinions and more variations of people's courses and their approaches to learning this stuff, just because there are so many nuances, and I can't say that anyone is expert enough or has like the singular approach. I mean, notice how
Yeah,
many data science courses there are. There's
yeah.
more data science courses than there are stars at this point. So,
Yes.
you know what I'm saying?
And
But
there are somewhat fewer data engineering courses. That's my sense. And the other
that's just
problem
because
with
it's not
data,
as popular.
it's
But
not as pop.
it's
Well,
gonna fast forward
yeah,
to like 3 years from now, though.
yeah,
What do you think is
yeah.
gonna happen?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think fundamentally it's very popular in the job market, but it hasn't been as popular reputationally amongst people looking for jobs. Like, oh,
Right.
what's the hot new thing? One formula we've heard from various data leaders is maybe 3 data engineers per data scientist if you really want an effective team. So think about those numbers, right, in terms
Yeah.
of how many jobs are going to be available. But people focus on like the visible part, which is the data science.
Well,
But
everyone
maybe
wants to do
that's
guitar solos. Nobody wants to play bass.
right. Exactly. Everyone wants to be the lead singer, right?
Yeah.
No one wants to be playing keyboards in the background or drums or something. That's an
Yeah.
exaggeration. Obviously, lots of people want to play
Speak
drums,
for
but
yourself.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so I think that this is part of it, though, because I mean, back to Raymond's point where he's studying
Yeah.
data engineering. It's my question is, and if Raymond's here, I'd love to know what you're studying, to level up on data engineering. Because I think the question we also get is, great, you're telling us we need to train data engineers,
Right.
I'm an aspiring data engineer and need to learn this stuff. How do I go about doing it? And therein lies kind of the crux. I mean, we have our own study group,
Mhm.
where we, I think both train people for taking certain certifications as well as, teach general data engineering practices. This study group is kind of like Fight Club, so
Right.
it's very underground. I'm not going to advertise it that much, but I'll make a mention
But
of
you
it in
just
case you're.
did. You just
But
did.
but I'll mention it in case you're interested and you want to go through
Right.
the hazing process of getting into this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But but we keep it small on purpose right now.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is, we are just the approach we're taking. It's I would say there's some really good materials out there. Like, obviously, we always plug Designing Data Intensive Applications. Like, I
Yep.
still think that's a good book. The critique I have of the book as it stands today is it was a book that was written for the landscape of 2016,
Yeah.
right? I still think fundamentally the underlying principles apply for that book, but as it applies to what a data engineer does day to day, it doesn't apply as much because there aren't as many. I would say data engineering is moving away from being a full-time role focused on distributed systems engineering,
Yep. Yep.
depending where
Unless
you
you're,
work.
well, yeah, if you work for Confluent, for example, that's your job, right? You're going to think a lot about distributed systems. But if you use Kafka, then you don't care as much about that. Maybe you care a little bit about tuning Kafka, but mostly you just want it to work and you want to focus on delivering data through Kafka. Kafka just becomes a tool. It's not your entire focus for your job.
I think some other books. I've actually been nerding out on Neil Ford's books a lot. He's got some fantastic architecture, fundamentals of software architecture. Then they got a new one that just came out last month. Software architecture, the hard parts. But I'd say this is a bit more advanced in some ways because I'm doing this partly for my own education, partly because we're writing a book, and architecture is a big piece of that.
Right.
But I would also say some advice is like borrow from the ideas of software engineering. The what's going on right now is in the data world, we always kind of joke it's about 10 years behind where software is, and all you need to do is just reach into like the best practices of software and pull those into data, and you've got some best practices. You probably have a startup as well, but stuff like data ops, observability, all this stuff. I mean, it's not new practices per se. It's just adapted to data. But understanding the underlying principles of software engineering, I think, also gives you a really good context for learning data engineering. And so, how else would you say somebody should, if you were a company right now, how would you train somebody to be a data engineer?
Yeah, again, I think you need at least one or two senior people to lead your strategy for data engineering, right?
But how would they know how would they know the strategy though?
That's a good question. I mean, in general, if I'm looking for data engineers, I'm looking for people with a very pragmatic knowledge of how to use data tools, and especially like modern data tools, things like Snowflake, Spark, BigQuery in a cloud environment. There are companies that don't need the cloud, who just they're so big that they can run their own data centers. I think the general trend is moving toward cloud data solutions. And so ideally, you can find someone who has enough experience in that domain of new technologies to be strategic in their thinking and not just tactical. Trouble is, those people are very hard to find because the domain of data engineering has changed so much in the last 5 years. Those people are just kind of being trained up in that time period. And so there aren't a huge number of them, in
Well,
my
I think there's a
opinion.
lot of misleading content too out
Yeah.
there still.
Yeah, I
Where
agree.
if so if you're a software engineer and you wanted to, take on data engineering
Right.
responsibilities at your company, the stuff that surfaces at the top of search results is typically outdated. It's about
Agree.
Hadoop,
Yeah.
all the stuff that is, I think people are more migrating away from right now. So we
Yeah.
still get questions, hey, so like, what's the best resource to learn MapReduce? And it's like, maybe you want to learn MapReduce for historical context, but I certainly don't
Right.
recommend learning it for something you're going to do day to day, because unless you're working at a company that's using Hadoop, and those are few and far between these days, I would say, and they're just shrinking.
Yeah.
MapReduce underlies a lot of techniques that you'll use, but it's not necessary in your day to day work. The thing is, what you said, focus on is more kind of. I hate to use the term modern data stacks. It just kind of drives me insane. But
It's a bit, yeah, it's a bit overused, certainly. Yeah.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but some of those tools in there really, I would say, better understand the like data lifecycle management and that kind
Right.
of stuff.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
but it's tricky because again, there's not a lot of good resources. Again, another person doing the great job, I think, at kind of highlighting a lot of the practices in tech is the Seattle data guy, Ben Rogojan.
Right.
He's out there, I think, doing a fantastic job. But there's the sad thing is there's just not a lot of us making content on data engineering. There's starting to be more. Some people I'm skeptical of because I don't see them actually working as data engineers. They just make content and
Yeah, exactly. And the tendency again is to jump onto things like MapReduce. And it's like, look, I actually was just writing about MapReduce in the book. And the point is that the basic parts of MapReduce, like mapping and shuffling and reducing, are still there. But everything, all modern data stacks use a lot of memory caching and other strategies that were not a part of MapReduce. And so you need to understand those modern approaches. And to your point, we see a lot of universities that are still teaching Mapreduce and in Hadoop, and the same is true for a lot of these data courses. What we see sometimes is that an organization already has data science content, and they sort of phone it in on the data engineering stuff by just grabbing a couple of books on Hadoop and basically converting them into courses, which doesn't necessarily serve people very well.
No, dude, it's
Yeah.
especially if you're paying for this at college, which we see some
Yeah,
professors doing.
exactly.
I'm like,
Yeah.
yo, students are getting ripped off. Stop that. Like, I understand, but part of the trouble is keeping current. I mean, I would say that you and I have a very good sense of what's current and what's not, and even then,
Right.
it's very hard to keep up. But
It's extremely
that's part
hard.
of the job. So.
Yeah.
Brian has a really good point here. We should shift from the modern data stack to a real-time data stack. I do agree. This is actually something I've been thinking about a ton recently, so I'm glad you brought this up. I mean, the modern data stack is, I know that, there are some talks at Coalesce about, streaming, using Materialize and stuff, but it still doesn't really address the point. My friend Devops Brown, actually over at Maroxa, had a really good point on the analytics engineering podcast the other week, where he said, the modern data stack ain't that modern because you're basically just using the same approaches and tools and techniques from the 60s. And it's like, because that's batch. I was like, yep, that's actually really true. It's mid-century modern, though, in the sense where, like, stuff from the 60s is cool. If you look at my furniture upstairs, you'll get a really good idea of mid-century modern. And I think that equates to mid-century modern data stacks. So
should we call it new century modern or something like this? Because we're in 2021, almost 2022. Like, I don't know. Like, there's no good name for all this stuff. Every name gets worn out and loses its meaning very quickly.
It does. I mean, it's kind of like I have an aversion to the term data science for that same reason. It's just it doesn't really mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know that it ever meant anything to begin with, but it certainly doesn't mean anything now. So
and
AI is another one, right? Like that's become abused pretty badly. I do, candidly, I do feel like the term data engineering may have a similar fate at some point, right?
I think
it could become overloaded. And so, I was arguing about this on a podcast, on the Data Band podcast, and I was kind of like, I think be prepared for these titles and roles to basically evolve. Data engineering, I think there's a point where I think the level of abstraction going on in the data stack is such that, the roles of machine learning, engineering, and software engineering, I think those could eventually be blurred in a lot of ways because that seems to be the evolution of things. So I'm not saying that, data engineering will go away as a practice. It's just that the term might be, it might be a bit diluted and will evolve. That's how things go. So,
well, and if nothing else, this artificial wall that exists between software engineering and data engineering needs to come down. And by that, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that those jobs are the same, but rather there's not this continuum between software engineering and data engineering. And there's often very poor communication. And I think the last 5 years or even 10 years, increasingly software developers recognize data as a key part of their product. They don't always do a good job of like opening up communication with the data engineering side from the get-go to make sure that product is developing in parallel to front-end development, back-end development, all the other traditional parts of software engineering.
Actually, our friend Carlos here. What's up, Carlos?
Yeah.
How's it going? He has a very good point here. It's an excellent point.
Yes.
It starts at the top, right?
Yes.
So,
I was about to actually loop back to this. So you were talking about how do you build, a data engineering practice? How do you train people? And so that's what I would say. You need really strong leaders at the top. You need like some senior people who have a vision of what they think data engineering should be at that company. And yes, their job is to do engineering, but a lot of their job is to train the people below them to basically replace them in the future.
Well, if it's a good leader, yeah.
If it's a good leader, right? Yeah, exactly.
So some leaders are like, I must gatekeep everything and hoard all knowledge and be a really crappy leader. But I think what Carlos is talking about is spot on.
Yeah,
and I totally agree. It does begin at the top. If you don't have the right leadership, I mean, we've all seen this. We've seen this time and time again. You may have a really good data engineering. We have a good engineering team in general, I will say, but without good leadership, it ain't going anywhere, right? It's a ship without a compass. It's a car without a GPS system. It's you without Google Maps these days. Basically, you have no sense of north, south, east, or west. So, and especially right now, though, I think another crux is finding and hiring the right leaders to begin with, because it's. hiring good leaders in is tough in any economy, in any job
Right.
market. I would say right now that has just, I don't have any stats, obviously, even though we're supposed to be data driven and stuff. But I can definitely tell hiring the right leaders, um, tech leaders, is hard because here's the deal: you could hire a good tech leader and they'll still fail if they
Yep.
don't have the proper executive leadership and so forth. So it's basically, you need to be aligned top to bottom on this, on data and everything else. But we see this a lot, like great leaders get into these companies and they're just like, WTF did I sign up for here? This is not what I was told.
Yeah, yeah. And the challenges right now are even bigger than they were 2 years ago because so many workers have gone remote. Like the workplace has changed dramatically, and I don't feel like we've really adapted. And so your job as a data leader is not only to lead on data, it's to figure out this new work culture and work environment and help people to be productive and help them to be happy in their jobs as well
But it's
because
not
they're
that
not
new
happy.
anymore, is it? It's
I
like, if
mean,
you even figure out how to manage people in a remote environment, if you've been a remote company, like
yeah.
what part didn't you pick up?
But it's still a challenge. I guess is my point. And
Yeah.
it seems like even the really big companies like Google and Amazon that should have this figured out because they're like very bleeding edge, really don't have it figured out at all. Like they want people to come back to the offices. They don't know if they want people to come back to the offices. Like in theory, they should have been doing this for years and years, but they just can't seem to
Or you could
wrap
be
their heads
like,
around it.
the CEO at Better. He's a great leader. I'm joking. F that guy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah, that's a great example of how not to do it. Apparently,
Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting one.
yeah,
Yeah, Ed Mitchell says, what's up, Ed? I'm basically a data warehouse architect with BigQuery, but that is also data under data engineering umbrella.
yeah,
Exactly the point here, right? So it's yeah, I mean, data warehouse architect, that's a title that's been around for like 20 years or something, maybe
yeah.
more, right? And
DBA,
so
ETL developer, all of
DBA,
these kind of,
yeah,
yeah,
BI developer and all
BI
that
developer.
stuff,
Yep,
and
yep,
basically, that's now data engineering. That's the entire point, right? If you were a big data engineer a few years ago, I don't really know who's using the term big data anymore, but you're basically a data engineer, I guess, or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah,
I don't know. Or maybe you're a small data engineer. Maybe that's a thing now. Maybe it's
yeah,
locally grown, home farm harvested data or something. But the
yeah.
whole point is things change, right? So, um,
And it's
yeah,
a continuum. I mean, to Edward's point, he's doing a lot of data warehouse stuff, but BigQuery and Snowflake actually aren't that different from tools like Hive, for example. Classic big data tools in Hadoop environment, and it's just a continuum. It really comes down to how you use those tools that
yep.
changes. The difference between BigQuery as quote unquote big data versus BigQuery as data warehouse really is just a matter of schema and what kind of data you're storing in there. There's not a lot
Right.
of
I mean,
difference
I think
otherwise.
we use BigQuery for our class. I think some of the
Yeah.
data sets that we have people use are like in the kilobyte sizes. So,
Right, because you can learn the
um,
same skills these
yeah,
days.
small
Yeah.
query doesn't have quite the same ring as BigQuery does, though. So,
Right, right. Yeah, no one wants to
right.
talk about using small query. Yep.
Yeah. Brian Olson, great topic. My thoughts are you start with buy for the foundation, move to build. That makes it more
Yeah.
important that the folks that you buy are good at building. I agree. Yeah, totally agree. And yeah, the order of operations in this thing, I think, really depends on your context and what you're trying to do out of the gate, and that comes down to really identifying what are the priorities.
Mhm.
When you're building a data stack, for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
right? I mean, we talked to a company the other day, and they showed us this I think 20-page document of like, here's the data stack that we want. I was like, cool. So which one of these like 50 things is which of the three are your first priorities?
Yeah,
Because we're not going to go and build this entire thing because that sounds like waterfall hell. So
yeah. Now, the nice thing, but I think a lot of companies are still struggling to wrap their heads around it because they're used to more of like a corporate procurement process where you sign 3-year contracts and someone, trucks in on a forklift some hardware or something like this and installs it in the data center. The nice thing is that you can be agile in designing your data stack in the cloud because it's so much of it's just turnkey, right? You can just turn on Snowflake, you can just turn on BigQuery, you can turn on Spark basically. And if you want to try something else, you can.
yeah, and I would say this is, the cloud right now, it provides you a lot of flexibility and a lot of
Yeah.
trial and error that you just wouldn't
Yeah.
get, back in the days when you're, spinning up the box in your data center. Like
Hmm.
nowadays, try out new stuff.
Yeah.
Break things in dev, of course.
In dev, yes.
Yeah. So set up a dev environment and test a bunch of stuff, and get to know your use case. Try out managed services from the clouds. Try out third-party services through the marketplaces in the clouds, or spin up open source, whatever you want. There's a ton of options. Brian here, he's from Trino, a fantastic product. Try it out. There's a bunch of other tools out there. I would say you live in the cool thing is right now you live in the golden age of data tools.
Yeah.
I cannot understate this enough or overstate this, one or two. But basically take advantage of the what did you say? You always call it the embarrassment of riches or something. I think that was from like the French Revolution or something back in the day.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know where maybe it did originate in the French Revolution.
Yeah, it's the first time I heard it or saw it in context. But the point being, you have an embarrassment of riches of tools. It's not like the old days where you basically you could have all colors of your Ford as long as it's black. Like
right.
There's any number of tools out there, and the thing is, it's really hard to find, I would say, crappy tools.
Right.
There are, I would say, borderline crappy tools, but it's not like most of the things out there are still, even the crappiest tools today are still better than the tools that people were using in production 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, things are good.
They're really good, and like the amount of maintenance required is very low, and you don't have to sign big upfront contracts. So you can that's part of why we're in the post big data era, in my opinion. And that's not to say that all big data problems have been solved or that there won't be improvements in the big data space, but like you can go to Snowflake and turn on an account, and you can start loading 100 terabytes of data almost immediately. Like that used to be a really big deal to process 100 terabytes of data. You can load a lot of data very quickly and start processing it, and it's not that big a deal, actually. And so that's the era we live in. I think part of the context around the embarrassment of riches, too, though, is that you do need to be careful, because there is a tendency, magpie syndrome or shiny object syndrome, we often hear it called, to just chase whatever is new and cool and not focus on like established technologies that will get the job done. There are just so many technologies. I hear of new ones like every day, and I'm like, how is it that I've been in this space for this long and I still constantly hear of stuff I've never heard of before? And apparently it's a cool new thing. But you don't want to be chasing those new things to the point where you're not getting your job done, because it's always like the latest and greatest thing every day.
Yeah, it's sort of like diet fads or something.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of these will be fads, right? Let's be frank. Like there's a lot of money floating around. There are a lot of tech companies. A few of them will be very successful. Many of them will be acquired or will fail at some point.
But I think this also kind of highlights, okay, so there's a couple threads to this conversation here too. So if you're going to build or buy talent, I would say try and buy as much managed services as possible to leverage what's probably going to be a pretty light amount of hires to begin with. It boggles my mind how many companies I talk to who are like, yeah, we're going to like get 200 data engineers and data scientists next year. And I'm like, but the back of my head is like, I hope you succeed. I really do. Here's the deal. I don't know that there's that many, in your local market, or even in the remote market right now, because everyone I talk to wants to do the same thing. Everyone says, "Oh, we're going to double our team next year," including us. Frankly, I mean, we have pretty aggressive hiring goals at Ternary, and by the way, if anyone wants to come work with us, let me know.
Come talk to us. Yeah, we'd love to talk to you.
But joking aside, it's challenging across the board, because like I said, hiring on a good day is a coin flip and a crapshoot. Try doing it in this environment where you're going to have to clamor for talent against everybody else. And so I think it really comes down to knowing what your requirements are. Like, what are you trying to build? When do you need it done by? What's your budget, both for talent and for technology? Everything has to have an ROI, but I think there's a particularly acute point in this environment where you might be waiting for a bit to make it. If you get your first hire, you might be waiting for a bit to get your additional hire. And so trying to leverage as much of managed services and stuff that's low maintenance will greatly benefit you. I would also recommend for whoever you hire, have in place an incentive program or a referral program where that person can refer candidates to you. The best hires I've always found are the ones that have been referred by other people. I always ask the question when somebody refers somebody. I ask, okay,
Yeah.
so are you going to bet your job on this person?
Right.
And that's the only question I have.
Yeah. Well, and you can interview the person recommending them, right? You can say, all right, what are this person's strengths? Like, how good are
Yep.
they technically? Are they a strategy and vision person? In other words, can they think about how the data is actually going to be used as opposed to, sitting down and writing Mapreduce jobs, which used to be a thing? Are they Can they communicate? Can they communicate with stakeholders? Can they think in terms of the data lifecycle, which is our entire focus of the book, which is like thinking about how data is consumed and how it's transformed and how it's actually served, as opposed to thinking about, I'm writing a Spark job right now. Can they think in terms of the whole
Hmm.
process from A to Z of what's going to happen with that data? And if the person recommending a new hire has a lot of experience working with them, they can probably give you pretty good answers to those questions.
They probably do,
So,
and I would say
yeah,
you need to hire a person who's, especially if it's your first hire for a
yeah,
data team, somebody who's good at designing and architecting data systems,
right,
right? Because that's going to be pretty fundamental. The big mistake we see is there's cargo culting
yeah.
data architectures. Especially if people are reading like the Netflix or Uber blogs and saying, well, let's just do what they're doing. And I'm like, is your company Netflix or is your company Uber or Facebook? If you're not, then because these companies have developed these systems because they have very particular challenges that they're trying to solve. That isn't your company, most likely.
Right. And they're operating in a scale where it makes sense to have 100 people working on one technology. You're not.
Right.
Like, you don't, you don't want to be, you probably don't want to be putting in pull requests to Kafka, is my guess. Like, until you get to a certain size, you really want to focus on just delivering data. And so that means, use Managed Kafka or use Google PubSub or use Amazon Kinesis. Use one of
Yep.
these technologies to get the job done instead of starting from scratch, standing up your own instances, dealing with Zookeeper, dealing with all this nonsense that's important but very, very hard.
Well, yeah, and part of the when we're talking about architecture, right? When you're
Yeah,
designing systems and architecting them, the thing we talk about a lot is architecture is basically the exercise of trade-offs,
yeah,
right? There's no, as Neil Ford says, there's no best architecture. There's only the least worst architecture. And so what you really need to assess too is what's going to get me to where I need to go for maybe the next year or so, because things will change, your requirements will change. And what we see a lot of times is people want to architect for a future state that's like 5 years away.
right,
You tell me who can predict the future 5 years from now.
right. And again, embrace the cloud in this domain. So it used to be that if I wanted a sort of a big data database like data warehouse, I'd have to go sign a $10 million contract with Teradata for 3 years of usage. And I'd have to be very committed to that technology for 3 years. And now I can just go turn on like Amazon Redshift, for example. I can just go spin it up. In fact, you did that after reInvent, right? You spun up Redshift serverless, and it wasn't a big deal, and you could try it out without having to sign any major contracts, but having to spend a bunch of money. Think in those terms. Think in terms of having an agile approach to these technologies.
Right, especially when these companies are giving you credits to try their stuff out.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
yeah. So, I mean, back to hiring real quick.
Yeah.
I think a common question we get is, should I go through a recruiting agency to find talent?
And I have very mixed feelings about this. I think we've both seen that there's kind of a misalignment between the knowledge that recruiters have and the actual needs of the jobs that they're trying to hire for. Frankly, I've seen some very good recruiters who have a better knowledge of the domain, but it's kind of exceptional, to be honest.
It's exceptional for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
And I would also say the incentives of the recruiter can sometimes be out of alignment with
right.
the needs of both the person they're looking for to hire as well as the company that engaged this
Yeah,
recruiter.
yeah,
So if the recruiter is incentivized to simply get people to apply for a job, right,
yeah,
you're gonna get a ton of crappy applicants
yeah,
because the recruiter is incentivized just to spray and pray at that point.
right.
If you're incentivized to get the best hire, I think that as a recruiter, then that's probably the more appropriate motivation and incentive alignment in that area. But it's still difficult because
Yeah,
we work with a ton of recruiters who ask us a lot of questions,
right.
such as, if I'm looking for a data engineer, what should I look for? Part of that's going to be scoped out with the company who's engaged that recruiter. But in a lot of cases, I would say when I look at these companies' job recs, I don't think that they understand what they're looking for either.
No, no, not at all. And again, this is where, technical leadership needs to do a better job of actually deciding what they need and having a strategic vision for hiring and how they're going to train people into their stacks versus looking for someone who has 20 years of experience with Snowflake or something ridiculous like that, which is often what we see.
Yeah, yeah. Keep talking. I'm gonna try and find this post real quick that I had commented on, but I thought it was pretty hilarious.
Okay,
So
so let me ask this question to people who are listening in. How many of you have strong opinions about the interview process used in tech and the gatekeeping that happens? And we need a way to raise hands on this show at some point. That would be really cool. I'd love to see how many people think that the interview process is kind of misaligned with what we actually need to be doing to recruit people. Because I think we're both of that opinion to some extent, right? Whiteboard interviews about Spark and Hadoop and even SQL are not necessarily going to suss out the best candidates for the job.
I think whiteboard interviews are mostly pretty dumb, to be
Yeah, but
honest.
they're the standard in tech, right? And
They're standard in
yeah.
tech, but here, why do you think they're the standard in tech, though?
I don't know. I mean, it's almost like okay. So part of I think part of this is that Google in the early days, and they became a model for other tech companies, focused on recruiting raw talent, right? So people out of school, out of Stanford or Berkeley, who really didn't know anything yet except what they learned in their degrees. So how do you handle those people? Well, they don't know anything. You can't interview them. They may not know SQL because it wasn't covered in their classes. They probably don't, even back then, didn't know any Hadoop or GFS or Mapreduce because it hadn't been well covered in their classes. So you kind of give them, frankly, these intelligence tests, right? Like you give them these crazy problems out of their algorithms classes and see if they can solve them on the fly. And I feel like that's become the tech hiring standard, even though it no longer applies when you're getting into more senior positions. Like you really care about how well they can do the actual job because now they have skills and you should be asking them questions about the things that they know about, the things they've spent the last 10 years doing.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think
Yeah.
skills are interesting. Let me share my screen real quick
Yeah.
here. So,
Yeah.
Nick saying, "What's up, Nick?" He wrote Ace of the Data Science interview, which you should go check
Mhm.
out if you haven't. But yeah, I think you can see this here. So he had a really funny post the other day. Basically, dear recruiters and hiring managers, please don't select all from technical skills. And I think this is an actual job post for a machine learning engineer where it's like, here's all the stuff you have to know.
Yeah.
Angular.
Seriously? Yeah. And the problem with this is that it incentivizes certain behaviors. It's what a lot of people have called for a long time resume driven development, right?
Yeah.
So people in a job will just try out as many technologies as they can so they can list them. Or they'll like spend their weekends just like spin up, okay, I spun up Spark. All right, I spun up, I don't know, BigQuery, whatever technology, played with it for 5 minutes, and then they can list it on their resume versus actually getting good at a technology or a handful of technologies and actually getting good at data. So, in other words, developing data intuition, developing knowledge of the data lifecycle and data best practices.
Yeah, but why do you think such idiotic job posts exist though? Like the one we just showed. Like to me, that's a hiring manager had to have looked at that. I'm guessing. And then my second question is, why?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, because first of all, are they using all those technologies on their team? And second, is any one person on their team using all those technologies? Like, yeah.
That's just it. If I saw that, if I was a candidate and saw that, I'd run the other way.
Well, so it would be one thing if you said in the job posting, hey, these are some things that are interesting to us. We think it's really cool if you know a lot of SQL or a lot of BigQuery or a lot of Spark or a lot of what was it, Mapreduce or Angular, whatever it is. Come talk to us. But saying that you're supposed to have a lot of experience with all these technologies is just kind of
It's
ridiculous.
ridiculous. It's impossible. Who
Yeah,
has that,
yeah,
right? I could think of like, you pick three of those technologies, you might have, somebody who's competent in three, maybe,
maybe.
but
Yeah,
not like
yeah.
all 20 or something like that. Tiago has a really good point here too. However you hire, don't use AI powered solutions. Their training data is very likely reproducing all the sorts of historical biases of people when hiring. I tend to agree with this. Um, Especially when you're dealing with like an applicant tracking system or something like that. I think these are just sort of the bane of the world right now. I get it. You want to be able to automate as much as possible. I think there's some companies like HireVue, I think are doing a pretty good job of the interview process, but and using AI for that. But in general, I tend to agree. We take a very low fidelity approach with hiring at Ternary, to be frank, partly because we're small. Partly because I think we're very picky about who we want to work with. I would say extremely picky who we want to work with.
Right.
So a lot of it is just let's go on a walk and talk, and then we'll talk tech, we'll talk shop, we'll talk about what you're into, we'll talk about you as a person too, and just kind of understand like what makes you tick. Because it's also tech skills is one aspect of that, but there's a really big the thing I've noticed with hiring and running teams is to me, tech skills are table stakes.
Right.
Like that. That to me is like, do you have a pulse? That's basically the same question. If you don't have the tech skills, do you have the capacity to learn them quickly?
Yeah.
The thing I always center on are a few things like character, integrity, smart, your ability to continuously learn things. But if you don't have the first two, character and integrity, like the rest of it doesn't matter. I'd rather have you be, as Warren Buffett always said, I took this from him, but it's kind of like, I'd rather have you be, have character, integrity, and be dumb than be smart and evil. So
and I mean, we do want smart people, but if you have smart people who have the interest, tech skills can be developed.
They can be
That's
developed.
what we found again and again.
Yeah, because there's things that can be taught and there's things that can't be taught, right? If you have a good work ethic, to me, that's something that it's really hard to train for. Like you can nudge people, but at the end of the day, like, and we all see this, right? I mean, the audience out there, like, think of people who have a good work ethic. Is that something that they went to college for? Probably not. You got it, and that's why you did well in college or whatever you're doing, is because you have a work ethic that's amazing. So actually, Ed has a pretty funny thing here. My last interview I just had two guys spend 15 minutes try to find out if my resume was BS. Just a series of, if you've done this, you'll remember the process. 0 difficult questions. That's interesting. That's unfortunate. So to me, that seems like a pretty lazy approach to.
Well, some of the stuff that goes on is just borderline immoral, right? So one of our friends got recruited by Amazon. He's like, look, guys, I'm not really interested, but okay, I'll come interview with you. Great. So he goes into the interview. They're like, oh, here's a take-home project that's like 20 hours of work. He's like, look, I already told you that I'm not interested. I know that if I go do this project, you'll like not hire me and then you'll just go use what I did anyway. I'm not doing that project.
Yeah.
That becomes the standard test of work ethic. There's this book, right? It doesn't have to be crazy at work, by Jason Fried and David, what is it, Hannemeyer Hansen? Who?
DHH. Yep.
Yeah. So they advocate that like one way to test work ethic is to just give someone a project, but it's a paid project. You hire someone as a contractor for like 2 weeks or something, and you just say, here's a part-time project, go do this, let's see how you do, we're going to pay you for it. It's not this BS where you're like getting people to do work for free, and then you see how they do on that time, and come back and say, oh, you did pretty well, we actually like working with you, do you want to come work for us?
Right. And you got to understand too, when you're giving these interviews, it is a job seeker's market right now. Obviously, this stuff can turn on a dime. I've seen it happen many times in my career. So don't get too cocky about stuff. But I will say right now, that you have a lot of chips at the table. Those chips could be taken away any moment. But for now, if an interview seems stupid, then maybe go to a company that has a less stupid interview process. So, or if they're putting you through a lot of trouble, just ask yourself, is it worth it? It might be. And I've sat through a lot of stupid things because I was like, at the end of the day, the outcome is worth it, right?
Right.
There's a lot of other things where the moment it gets weird or dumb, ain't waste your time, not worth your time. Move on. So
well, like if you get a PhD, you have to pass advancement candidacy exams, right? You have these written exams you have to pass, then you have the oral exam, which is like a hazing ritual that everyone has to go through, and that's just part of what you have to do. The question is, to what extent do we have to put up with similar things in the tech industry? And to what extent should tech companies, and actually any company, be changing their interview process to try to get better candidates and to have more success in recruiting people? Because there's all this whining and complaining about not finding talent. It's like, well, maybe you need to reassess your hiring process.
Yeah, it's true. Interesting. Sorry, so my mic was unplugged for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like, what's going on here? Christina has some good points too. She says, I think that with a proliferation of tools and services, it becomes important to consider lean solutions to problems and business processes. Regardless of the tool use, the deployment of lean research methods from Scrum, Six Sigma focus on how to assist an organization approach to approach a goal in actionable time-bound measurable steps. These approaches can allow an organization to develop a precise vision on the a issue steps and not so much focus on learning tools and using new technology. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the term lean has kind of gone out of fashion, right? But maybe it's time for it to come back. I mean,
Lean, well, okay, tell me
is
this
it?
though. Where
Yeah.
did DevOps get its inspiration from?
Well, that's just it, right? We've renamed things, but it's still fundamentally it's these ideas that go back a long
Yeah.
ways, right?
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
what
Six
the
Sigma has definitely fallen out of, it's not as popular as it used to be,
yeah.
as,
But the core idea is
but the
valid,
core
of
idea is
course.
valid, right?
Yeah,
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 I think what she's saying is spot
yeah.
on.
Completely
So,
agree. So
yeah.
yeah, it's nice. I guess what I'm saying is that even though supposedly these things have gone out of fashion, it's actually nice to see some of this older terminology coming back because the ideas here are
But what
very,
do you think
very
about her
valid.
idea of applying that to, focusing, on the vision for the company?
Basically I agree. Like you need tools, right? Tools are important, but for so long, especially in the big data craze, the focus was just on tools and not on results. And I think it is time, and I think this is already happening, but it is time to shift focus back to results, to actually saying, what are we getting out of this project? How do we deliver more efficiently? Then to choose the tools to do that job versus
Well,
everyone is
I
doing
would
it.
argue that
Yeah,
as a business, the focus on results never went away. It may
yeah,
have been with the engineering team and focusing on,
yeah,
sort of stargazing, with fancy new telescopes and stuff, so to speak. But like the end result is, did you get any results or not? And I know the business, there was definitely a time when, several years ago, I noticed that companies were cutting back on data initiatives because they
hmm,
weren't getting any results,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So the question was often, do I need, okay, so we spent a lot of money in this Hadoop stack. What do we get from it?
Hmm.
Right. And you had us upgrade to Spark. What do we get out of that? And you had us hire, a whole team of data scientists. And I don't see any results from this.
Yep.
So
Yep.
therefore, money is tight and sorry.
Yeah. And it was basically it was a very effective sales pitch, right? And I don't think tech people are well, actually we are pretty good at sales pitches sometimes. We are good at selling people on the idea that technology is magically going to solve problems. And that did not happen. And it's too bad because Hadoop itself was not the problem. The problem was using Hadoop without results focus, like without
Yeah.
saying, well, what are we actually going to do with this data?
Yeah.
What is our goal with this data? Versus we need to collect all the data and do cool stuff with it. Well, what do you want to do with it? It's going to be cool. I can tell you, it's going to be awesome.
Mm-hmm. Shabina has a good question here. What do you think is an ideal interview process for a data engineer?
And I think we're still trying to crack the code. Would you say?
I think it really depends. And
Yeah,
again, if you're like, I think to the prior discussion that we just
yeah,
had though,
yeah.
what's the outcome you're trying to drive
Right.
at, right? So to me, an ideal interview process is obviously find candidates, but that also presupposes you have a good job description to begin with.
Hmm.
So writing, I think, an accurate job description that's not like the one that we showed, where it's just an encyclopedia of technologies you probably don't even use.
Yeah.
Like focus on the problem that you're trying to solve, right? So I would say that's the first thing. Your job description should be focused on what are we trying to solve for
Right.
as
Right.
a company. Obviously, not giving away too many company secrets in the process that your competitors can use against you, but focus on focus on the best person who can finding the best person who can solve that problem. I think too often the data engineering job recs are focused on, I need somebody who can know this whole smorgasbord of
Yeah.
technologies.
Yeah.
To me, that's the wrong approach, because you can know the whole smorgasbord of technologies and still be a complete dolt at trying to solve the problem that your business is hiring you to solve. The second thing I would look at is, okay, so the interview process is what she's asking about. So once you have a candidate in there, I would maybe have a technical assessment, but not in a whiteboard sense. I would have maybe some borderline, some baseline questions. But more importantly, what I would dig into is the candidate. You've obviously, I think, probably got, if you're doing interviews at this stage, you've probably got a pile of resumes that you sifted through, right? So this kind
Yeah.
of implies that you've already looked at the technical chops of somebody. I'm more interested in past problems you've solved and really digging into how you solve them. So my approach is I ask a lot of, tell me about that. What about this angle? Did you consider this? Walk through how deeply did somebody really go into solving this problem, and how deeply do they understand what they did? To me, that's I found that's the best technical assessment. I try not to ask people do to do like Fibonacci sequences or something. I think that's stupid. It doesn't really tell you anything.
Right.
But what I can do is I can ask you, okay, so let's walk through this project, and then we go from there. Then I tend to focus more on, okay, would I like working with this person? Is this person gonna be a good fit on the team?
Right.
Because the
Can they
number one,
communicate?
because
Yeah.
the number one thing I've seen where teams succeed or break down isn't so much the technical aspects of a candidate. Is that person going to become a toxic element on my team?
Which is a huge problem.
That
It's gotten a lot of
more than anything
attention.
else
Yeah.
will make your project sink or swim. My experience.
Yeah. And I also like the base camp, hiring approach,
I like that too.
which is we doesn't have to be crazy at work. That is, make someone a contractor for a while. I mean, we actually like to hire a lot of people as interns at fairly, low starting wages, frankly. That doesn't necessarily work for senior people, though. They're just going to be like,
No,
well,
no,
no, I
seniors
don't.
get paid what they
Seniors
get
not going to
paid.
take that, but
Yeah.
it has worked for us where someone is shifting professions, like moving from one domain of tech into data, where they don't know a lot of data already, or where they're coming out of school. It's worked pretty well. But yeah, if they're senior, then maybe make them a contractor for even a month and say, can you work on this project? You pick the tools. You can decide which tools you're going to use to solve this problem. But here's what the problem is. Go pick your favorite tool and then come back and be ready to explain
But
it
there
to
needs to be an
us.
equal exchange of value, right? Like
Yeah.
our approach is never to get a candidate in and like try and rip them off or
Yeah.
steal their time or something. I think that's the wrong. We see a lot of companies doing something
Right.
like that, though. The
Right.
20-hour interview take home test or something is a good example of that.
Yeah.
Like time theft, because what it does, it sends the wrong message about your company.
Right.
Because if you're going to treat me like this during the interview process, what's it going to be like when we go work together?
Yeah, you don't value my time. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, just pay them to do the job. And I wonder if this wouldn't actually save companies money sometimes, because hiring is so expensive, but they don't want to pay people to do contract work. They just want to pay recruiters and pay other, channels. But
But then
like, no, no,
a
like,
lot of
yeah,
engineers, though, I would say they're not around to do contract work, and I would say you're going to get a big
yeah,
no on that too. So,
yeah,
the other thing I would say is, kind of closing out, if you're trying to look for candidates, this is where it pays to be embedded in your community.
yeah.
And so, I think by virtue of us, attending or running meetups in our local area, which is Salt Lake City, we just get to know a lot of people over the years. And I would say
Hmm.
that in itself is a really good hiring funnel where, I got my eye on a lot of people that if they switch jobs, maybe they can come work with us and vice versa,
Yep,
and so
yep.
that sort of short circuits the question, well, like, you want to come work as a contractor? Because a lot of people don't have time for that. You know what I'm saying?
They have to
Like,
take time off work, which you have to do
yeah.
the same thing with the 20-hour Amazon project. You're basically like
Yeah, you have
taking
to
a
take
week
time
off
off
of work
work.
to try.
I know Automatic,
Yeah,
they do a good
yeah,
job at this where, I have some friends that work at Automatic, the company behind WordPress, and what they'll do is they'll just pay you, X amount of dollars. I think it's the same for anybody really, whether you're interviewing for the CFO position or whether you're interviewing for, kind of help desk or something, but
hmm,
they'll just pay you X amount. You come in and just work side by side with somebody on a small
yeah,
project. It's not going
yeah.
to be too time consuming. And then from there, and I think that's maybe the best approach. As Matt indicated, if somebody's a very unknown quantity and saying that, they're coming from something that's not directly related to data engineering, we'll probably hire you as, I hate to use the word intern because it makes it sound like you're just getting us coffee, but like, it's a try before you buy situation. You try us
Yeah,
out, we pay you very well actually, and
yeah, yeah.
it's
Scoped finite time,
yeah,
basically.
and we'll
And
just try it out.
yeah,
But I think to me that's how an interview process should work.
yeah,
A company should put its money where its mouth is, and the way you do that is simply by having a trial phase where you're working with people. And
yeah.
if it works, great, because it's a two-way street. You learn if you want to work with us. We learn if we want to work with you. And for at least for what Ternary does, I think that's worked really well. We actually have people who are asking to come work with us, which is really rare in
It's
this
a really nice
environment.
position to be
So
in. Yeah,
yeah, but that said, I would say it depends on your company and your company culture. There's not a one size fits all approach, and this
I
what
agree.
we're suggesting
Yeah,
won't work for a lot of other people. So,
yeah.
well, cool. We're coming up on time. So speaking of
I'll
team
just make
culture,
one more comment.
yeah,
I think the idea of using a social process for hiring actually has a lot of merit. I mean, again, in our experience, you learn a lot more about a candidate from the person that recommends them than you would just from a recruiter who found them on LinkedIn and looked at their resume. Works way better. However, we still have this problem of bias and That's a huge
Bias is
problem
a
in
big
tech.
thing. It's a
Yeah.
big, well, it's a big thing in any hiring, right? I mean,
Yeah,
who are you going
that's
to
right.
hire? The person who's probably most likely, which means you're biased.
Yeah. So I think you need to combine the social approach with like actively trying to bring in less likely candidates, people who have traditionally been excluded from these jobs. So hopefully, if we
Mhm.
can combine those, then we will have a better
I think
hiring
so. And as
process.
George
And yeah,
Viracan says, "What's up, George?" It's always
yep,
best to try it out. I agree. I mean,
yeah,
I just want to experience. It's probably the only
yeah,
way to make sure that a candidate is at least somebody you want to go forward with. I wish there were a better way. Kind of closing out. Ed Mitchell asked, he only sees 6 or 9 month contracts. Do companies know how to segment something to a useful 1 month project? Yeah, get back with us.
Basecamp
So
claims that they do, right? So
yeah, yeah, but it's just something where I think like I said, it works for us. May not work for you, but try before you buy. But yeah, recapping though, hiring is tough. I don't think
yeah,
it's going to get any easier in 2022.
right,
There's just the macro trend of the great resignation that's happening right
yep,
now. And I
yep,
think more than anything, what people are realizing is there's probably other ways to work or not work. That's it. So, but this is the reality as and as an employer, and this is mainly geared towards employers, or people trying to build their teams. This is a very real thing going on right now. You can put your head in the sand and say, well, everyone's going to magically come to me and I'll magically double my team. I would push back on that, but
yeah.
you know, um, whatever you think is going to work is your deal. So
Building a team takes time, even if you have all the talent in the world, right?
it does.
Doubling the team is a very hard process if you want to do it right.
Do it right.
So
It's hard, man,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks to the
All
audience.
right.
Great questions. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube, please do so. Check out Ternary Data on YouTube. Also, we have a weekly newsletter at ternarydata.com.
Yeah.
Has exclusive content. Every week we publish that, plus some awesome links and events that we're stoked on. Check that out. If you haven't liked our LinkedIn page as well, please do so. Please follow us on LinkedIn at Ternary Data. Just search for that and give us some support there. We're going to have a lot more content and exclusive stuff going on there as well. So awesome. Until next week. And I think next week it's also you and me, Matt. So we'll find a topic that's near and dear to us and we'll rant on that too.
Yeah.
So
And if our listeners have topics that interest them, they'd like to post comments on, send us a message or comment on this video and we'll try to take those up at some point. So,
I think that's awesome,
yeah,
actually. Yeah. Hit us up, message me. I'm Joe Reis. Hit me up. So, all right. We'll talk to you all later. Have a good day.